November 8, 1942. The coast of North Africa. The United States Army was landing in force for the first time in the European theater of World War II. Operation Torch. Landings in Morocco and Algeria. Thousands of American soldiers wading ashore, rifles held high, ready to prove themselves. They were green, completely untested in combat. Many had been civilians just months earlier, store clerks, farm boys, college students. They'd trained stateside, practiced maneuvers in Louisiana and the Carolinas, learned to march and shoot, and they were confident, supremely confident. They were Americans. They had industrial might. They had energy. They had enthusiasm. What they didn't have was experience. What they didn't have was doctrine. What they didn't have was any realistic understanding of what they were about to face. Because waiting for them in the deserts and mountains of Tunisia was the most professional, most tactically sophisticated, most battle-hardened army in the world. Erwin Rommel's Afrika Korps. The Americans had come to fight the masters of modern warfare, and they were completely unprepared. The German generals were not impressed. They had watched the American landings with a mixture of curiosity and contempt. They read intelligence reports on American training standards, equipment, leadership. They interrogated the first prisoners taken in skirmishes. Their conclusion: the Americans were soft, a capitalist army, not a warrior one. They had excellent equipment. Everyone agreed American trucks and logistics were first-rate, but they didn't know how to fight. Rommel himself, when informed of the American entry into the North African campaign, reportedly remarked that the Americans were poorly led and tactically naive. They would learn eventually, but their education would be written in blood. The Germans had reason for this confidence. They had been at war for 3 years. They had conquered Poland in weeks, France in 6 weeks. They had pushed deep into the Soviet Union. They had perfected blitzkrieg, combined arms warfare at its finest. Their artillery doctrine was aggressive, flexible, and deadly. The legendary 88mm flak gun, originally designed as an anti-aircraft weapon, had been brilliantly adapted to kill tanks in direct fire. German artillery officers were trained to move their guns forward, use them offensively, support breakthroughs. German units operated with off-trags tactic, mission-type orders. Commanders at every level had initiative. They could react, adapt, exploit opportunities without waiting for orders from above. The Wehrmacht was a tactical masterpiece, and they were about to teach the Americans a very harsh lesson. February 14, 1943, Kasserine Pass, Tunisia. This is the lowest point in the story, the nadir. The moment of absolute humiliation that would force the U.S. Army to completely reinvent itself. The Americans were dug in at defensive positions in the mountain passes of western Tunisia. The plan was to hold the line, prevent German forces from breaking through to the Allied supply bases. The Germans attacked, and the Americans collapsed. It wasn't just a defeat, it was a disaster. A rout. American command was fractured. Different units under different commanders, with unclear chains of authority, contradictory orders. Communications broke down. Units became isolated. And critically, this is the key to understanding what happened, American artillery was used piecemeal. A single battery here, a single gun there. Individual artillery units attached to individual infantry battalions, firing independently, supporting their local sector only. It was decentralized, it was flexible, it was exactly how the Germans used their artillery, and it was completely inadequate. Rommel's panzers, supported by their own artillery and the Luftwaffe, punched through the American lines with contemptuous ease. They flanked defensive positions. They isolated strong points and bypassed them. They got into the American rear areas and created chaos. American units, lacking centralized artillery support, lacking coordination, lacking experienced leadership, broke and ran. Tank crews abandoned their vehicles. Infantry threw away their weapons and fled. Entire battalions disintegrated. The Germans captured thousands of prisoners, hundreds of vehicles, mountains of supplies. Rommel sent a message back to Berlin. The Americans are not a serious threat. They fight like amateurs. And he was right. The US Army had arrived in North Africa confident, even arrogant. They were about to learn that enthusiasm and industrial capacity were not enough. Modern war required doctrine, experience, professional competence. The Germans were not shocked by their victory at Kasserine. They were validated. Their low opinion of American fighting capability had been proven correct. The Americans simply did not know how to fight. Eisenhower was furious. The defeat at Kasserine Pass triggered a revolution in the American military. Heads rolled, commanders were relieved, the entire command structure was reorganized. The loud, visible part of that revolution was General George S. Patton. Patton arrived to take command of Second Corps like a force of nature, all swagger and profanity and gleaming pearl-handled revolvers. Blood and guts Patton. He restored discipline through sheer force of personality and an obsessive attention to military formality. He made soldiers wear helmets at all times, even behind the lines. He made them wear neckties and leggings in the desert. He fined officers for not saluting. He personally stood at crossroads and berated soldiers who weren't moving fast enough. It was theater. Deliberate theater designed to shock a defeated army back into fighting trim. And it worked. Morale improved. Discipline tightened. The defeated, demoralized rabble from Kasserine began to look like soldiers again. But Patton's contribution, while important, was largely superficial. The real revolution, the one that would change not just this campaign, but the entire American way of war for the next 80 years, was happening more quietly. The real revolution was being led by artillerymen. General Leslie J. McNair, commanding Army ground forces back in the United States, had been developing new artillery doctrine for years. His disciples in theater, men like General Lucian K. Truscott, who commanded the 3rd Infantry Division, were putting those theories into practice. They looked at the defeat at Kasserine and drew a very different conclusion than Patton did. The problem wasn't discipline. The problem wasn't morale. The problem wasn't even tactics. The problem was doctrine. Fundamental doctrine. The Americans had been trying to fight like Germans, decentralized, flexible, mobile artillery supporting local commanders. And they couldn't win that way, because they weren't Germans. They didn't have 3 years of combat experience. They didn't have the professional NCO corps. They didn't have the institutional knowledge. But they had something else. Something the Germans didn't have and couldn't match. They had industry. The new American artillery doctrine was built on a simple, brutal realization. Germany was a tactical power. They had better trained soldiers, more experienced officers, superior small unit tactics. America was an industrial power. They could build more guns, produce more shells, field more troops than any nation on earth. The lesson wasn't be more like the Germans. The lesson was stop trying to fight like the Germans. Fight like Americans. The new doctrine was elegant in its simplicity. We will not duel, we will annihilate. The Germans used artillery as a scalpel, precise surgical strikes supporting tactical maneuvers. The Americans were about to use artillery as a sledgehammer, a continent-sized, industrial strength, mathematically optimized sledgehammer. They would centralize control, pool all artillery into division-level and corps-size-level fire support. Treat the guns not as individual weapons, but as a single, coordinated system. And they would develop a method, a revolutionary method, for delivering overwhelming firepower on a single point at a single moment with mathematical precision. They were going to turn artillery into an industrial process, and it was going to change warfare forever. For 300 years, from the invention of field artillery in the Renaissance to World War II, artillery worked essentially the same way. You had a forward observer, an officer or non-commissioned officer positioned with the frontline troops, watching the enemy through binoculars. He would spot a target, a machine gun nest, a mortar position, a concentration of enemy troops. He would radio back to his battery, his assigned group of 4 to 6 guns, usually a few kilometers behind the lines. The battery would calculate a firing solution, adjust the guns, fire one shell. The forward observer would watch where it landed. 200 meters short, 50 meters left. The battery would adjust. Fire another shell. 100 meters short. Another adjustment. Another shell. 50 meters over. Split the difference. Finally, on target. Fire for effect. And the battery would fire multiple shells at that target. This process took time. 30 seconds at minimum, often a minute or more. And that time was lethal, not to the enemy, but to the effectiveness of the barrage. Because the enemy heard the ranging shots, they saw the explosions, they knew artillery fire was coming, and they had time, precious seconds, but enough to take cover, to dive into foxholes, trenches, bunkers. By the time fire for effect arrived, most of the enemy was protected. The barrage would suppress them, make them keep their heads down, but casualties were often light. This was the way every army in the world used artillery. It was accepted. It was conventional wisdom. The Americans were about to make it obsolete. The American secret weapon wasn't a gun. It wasn't a new type of shell. It wasn't a vehicle. It was a room. Sometimes just a tent. The Fire Direction Center, the FDC. This was the brain, the nervous system, the mathematical heart of the new American artillery doctrine. Here's how it worked. Imagine you're a forward observer, crouched in a foxhole on the front line. You spot a German mortar position 800 meters ahead. You radio back, not to your battery, to the FDC. The FDC is a command post, could be a tent, could be a truck, could be a bunker, staffed by a team of specialists. Fire direction officers, plotters with maps and grease pencils, computers, not electronic computers, but men trained in rapid mathematical computation, armed with slide rules and firing tables. You give them the target coordinates, just a map grid reference, and then the magic happens. The FDC has detailed information on every artillery piece in the entire division, sometimes the entire corps. The M2A 105mm howitzers, the M1 155mm long tom guns, the M1 8-inch howitzers. They know where each gun is positioned. They know its current ammunition load. They know its rate of fire. They know the ballistic characteristics of every shell type. In seconds, the FDC calculates a firing solution for every single gun that can range the target. Not just one battery, every battery. Guns spread out across miles of front, hidden behind different hills in different valleys at different ranges. The FDC computes the azimuth, the elevation, the propellant charge for each gun. Different guns at different ranges need different solutions. The FDC calculates them all. And here's the revolutionary part. The FDC doesn't just tell each gun where to shoot, it tells them when to shoot. This is the 1,000 shells a minute moment. This is the mathematical magic that would terrify the Germans. The FDC calculated the time of flight for each shell. A 155mm shell from a gun 10 miles away takes, let's say, 30 seconds to reach the target. A 105mm shell from a gun 5 miles away takes 15 seconds. So the FDC tells the 155mm gun to fire first, then 15 seconds later tells the 105mm gun to fire. Both shells, fired at different times from different locations, arrive at the target at the exact same instant. Scale this up. Dozens of batteries, hundreds of guns, all aimed at a single grid square, all firing at precisely calculated intervals. The result? Time on target, TOT. Hundreds of shells from dozens of different locations, different ranges, different gun types, all flying through the air in carefully calculated ballistic arcs, all converging on a single point, all landing at the exact second. No warning, no ranging shots, no time to take cover. Just instant, overwhelming, apocalyptic firepower delivered with mathematical precision. The target doesn't hear anything, sees nothing, and then the entire world explodes. And it doesn't stop, because it is. The FDC can coordinate follow-up volleys. The guns reload and fire again, and again, and again, all shells still arriving simultaneously. It was industrial warfare raised to a science. Firepower as a factory product, delivered with assembly line efficiency. No army in the world had this capability. Not the Germans with their tactical brilliance, not the Soviets with their massed artillery. No one. And the Germans were about to experience it for the first time. Spring 1943. The final battles for Tunisia. The Germans and Italians were compressed into a shrinking pocket in northeastern Tunisia. They were dug in, well fortified, still dangerous. The Afrika Korps, even depleted and exhausted, was a professional force. The 10th Panzer Division held defensive positions near El Guettar. They had fought the Americans before, at Kasserine. They knew what to expect. Green troops, poor coordination, mediocre artillery support. They were confident, even outnumbered. Even with their backs to the sea, they believed they could hold. The Americans would attack. The Germans would maneuver, counterattack, repel them. It had worked before. It would work again. They had no idea what was coming. March 23rd, 1943. Morning. El Guettar. A German officer, let's call him Hauptmann Schmidt, a composite of several accounts, is in a command post overlooking the American positions. He's scanning the terrain with binoculars, looking for signs of the expected attack. He sees nothing unusual, some movement in the American lines, but nothing alarming. No major concentrations, no obvious preparations for assault. He hears nothing. The front is relatively quiet. And then the world ends, not gradually, not with warning shots. Instantly. The first volley is not a few shells, it's everything. 12 battalions of American artillery, over 100 guns, fire simultaneously. 105mm howitzers, 155mm long toms, some heavier pieces, all aimed at a single German strongpoint. Hundreds of shells, all arriving at the exact same instant. The sound is beyond description. It's not explosions, plural. It's one continuous, overwhelming roar. A physical force that hits you like a wall. The ground doesn't just shake, it liquefies. The shock waves ripple through the earth. Bunkers collapse. Trenches cave in. Men are killed not by shrapnel, but by the pure concussive force, their organs pulped by overpressure. And it doesn't stop. 10 seconds later, the second volley arrives. Just as precisely timed, just as devastating. Then a third, a fourth, a fifth, for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, the barrage continues. Hundreds of shells per minute, all focused on a single killing ground, maybe 200 meters square. The Americans had a phrase for this: steel rain. The Germans, when they could speak at all afterward, called it something else. Feuerhölle, artillery hell. Let's put numbers to this. A single American 105mm howitzer crew, well-trained and working efficiently, can fire 4 rounds per minute sustained. But we're not talking about a single gun. We're talking about an entire corps' artillery. The U.S. Second Corps in Tunisia had approximately 200 to 300 artillery pieces of various calibers under centralized fire direction control. When a TOT mission was called, every gun that could range the target would fire. Let's be conservative. 100 guns participate in the barrage, each firing 3 to 4 rounds per minute. That's 300 to 400 shells per minute. Sustained. But in the initial volley, the time on target moment, you could have 200 shells arriving simultaneously. Then, because the guns are already reloaded, Another 200 shells 15 seconds later, another 215 seconds after that. In the first minute, easily 600 to 800 shells. Some TOT missions using the full Corps' artillery exceeded 1,000 shells in the first minute. 1,000 shells in 60 seconds. On a target area the size of a football field. This wasn't war, this was industry. This was mathematics weaponized. This was the American economy, the factories of Detroit, Pittsburgh, Gary, delivering its products COD to German positions in Tunisia. The German doctrine had no answer for this. You couldn't maneuver away from it. It was too fast. You couldn't counterattack. There was nothing to counterattack. The guns were miles away, hidden, dispersed. You couldn't flank it. You couldn't outthink it. You could only endure it. And most men couldn't. German prisoners taken after these barrages were in a state of shock. Not just physical shock, though many had ruptured eardrums, bleeding from the nose and ears, concussions, but psychological shock. They used words like black magic, impossible. How did they do that? Many didn't believe it was artillery at all. They thought it was some new type of bomb, some secret weapon. One prisoner insisted the Americans must have used hundreds of airplanes, dropping bombs simultaneously. He couldn't conceive of artillery achieving that concentration of fire. When interrogators explained it was conventional artillery, just very well coordinated, the prisoners were even more demoralized. One German officer, a veteran of the Eastern Front who had survived Soviet artillery barrages at Stalingrad, said, "The Russians have more guns. But the Americans have more mathematics." Another, a battalion commander whose unit was effectively destroyed in a single TOT mission, was recorded saying, "We were not defeated by their soldiers. We were defeated by their calculators, by their slide rules. This is not war, this is extermination." And he was right. The Battle of Kasserine Pass in February 1943 was the US Army's catastrophic failure. A humiliation that exposed every weakness in American training, doctrine, and leadership. The Battle of Guettar in March, just 1 month later, was its graduation, its coming-of-age moment. The green, overconfident, poorly coordinated force that had broken and run at Kasserine had been transformed. Not through heroism, though there was plenty of that. Not through individual courage, though American soldiers fought bravely. Through doctrine, through mathematics, through the systematic application of industrial firepower. The US Army had learned how to fight. And what they learned was uniquely American. They couldn't outmaneuver the Germans. They couldn't match German tactical sophistication at the company or battalion level. Their junior officers weren't as experienced. Their NCOS weren't as professional. But they didn't need to be. Because while the Germans were maneuvering, the Americans were calculating. While the Germans were infiltrating, the Americans were plotting firing solutions. While the Germans were concentrating forces for a local counterattack, the Americans were calling down mathematical devastation from the sky. This was the birth of the American way of war. Not the only American way, there have been many, but a dominant strand that would persist for the next 80 years. Overwhelming firepower, centralized control, industrial-scale violence delivered with technological precision. This doctrine, born in the deserts of Tunisia, was perfected in Sicily, unleashed on the beaches of Normandy and the hedgerows of France, applied in the Pacific Island campaigns, used in Korea, in Vietnam, where artillery hell became a routine experience for North Vietnamese forces. In the deserts of Iraq, where fire direction had evolved from slide rules to computers, but the underlying principle remained the same. When American forces are in contact with the enemy, they don't have to win through clever tactics. They call for fire support, and the fire support arrives. Overwhelming, precise, devastating. The German generals came to North Africa expecting to fight soldiers. Brave soldiers, perhaps, but inexperienced, poorly led, tactically naive. They were shocked to discover they were fighting a factory that could deliver 1,000 shells per minute, COD, to any grid square on the map. A factory with an unlimited supply of steel and high explosive. A factory that treated war not as an art, but as an industrial process. Erwin Rommel, the desert fox, the master of mobile warfare, wrote in his diary after Guettar, "The Americans have learned quickly. Their artillery is excellent. The volume of fire they can bring to bear is extraordinary. We have nothing comparable." That was the moment. The moment the German generals realized that tactical brilliance, operational art, professional military excellence, all the things the Wehrmacht prided itself on, might not be enough. Because they weren't fighting soldiers. Not really. They were fighting mathematics. They were fighting logistics. They were fighting the arsenal of democracy, and you can't outflank an equation. The Americans had learned how to kill in Africa. Systematically, efficiently, with industrial precision. And they were just getting started.